Hi, I'm Joseph Phillips. I'm the Director of Education at Instructing.com, where we teach project management. In this series of videos on value, we're talking about why do we do a project? Why are we investing the time and money and energy and effort into creating this thing? Because the thing that we're creating, the goal is that it has value in it, that it's treasured. It's why we're working towards the end result of the project. So we initiate the project, we plan for the project, we execute it, we have monitoring, controlling, and now we have closing. One of the most exciting portions of the project is we want to close out the project. When we close out the project, there are a lot of activities that have to be done. So we're closing the project, but we could also close the phase. So we're going to talk about both concepts here. First off, closing out the phase. A phase is a portion of a project. The phase typically describes the work that's being done in that portion of the project. Like if we're building a house, we have the pre-work phase, like the permitting and the blueprints and so on. And then we have that phase is done, and then we get into the foundation phase, building the foundation, and then the framing phase, and electrical and plumbing, and so on, where there's these distinct categories of work that allow the project to move forward. So we have phases. The end of a phase is often symbolized with a milestone, that a milestone shows progress in the project. In order to move from one phase to another, there are often rules or circumstances or inspections that have to happen to allow the project to move from this phase to this phase. And whatever those rules are or circumstances are called phase gates, that you have to pass through that phase gate, an inspection, a payment, whatever it may be, to go to the next phase of the project. When we close out a phase, what we are saying is that the work up to this point has been inspected and approved, and these are the results of that phase. These are the results of the time and the monies and the risk and so on. And that is all managed and accepted and communicated. And now we can go into the next phase of the project, foundation, the framing, or whatever it is, and go through the plan accordingly. In each phase, we likely have different resources, not just material, but people. You're not going to have the same people in the foundation phase that you do in the electrical and the plumbing phase. Not always the same skill set there. So as we move through phases, not only does the phase describe the work, there is a time and cost expectation, there's resource management, there's quality expectations, and then we have an inspection of the work that's been done to allow us to go to the next phase of the project. In construction or very large projects, what's often agreed upon up front is these are the different milestones at the end of these different phases. At the end of each phase where a milestone is reached, there is a payment for the work done to this point that allows the project to move to the next milestone. So it looks like a stair step. So you have the first phase, you get a payment, you go up. The next phase, you get a payment, you go up. And the next phase, and so on, until you get to the very end where value is realized, and that's the total cost of the project. That if you're going to build a house for me and it's going to cost $800,000, I don't just write you a check for 800 grand. That I'll write you a check that we agree in these different phases that you're going to get some cash infusion. So we're both sharing the risk that the work will continue and that I'm paying for it as we move forward. So that is the idea of step funding, that's typically tied to each phase. So at closure of a phase, the prior phase, there's a step fund to get to the next phase often. Not always in every project, but often. So we close out the phase. This means those resources that are no longer needed are expelled, if you will, from the project. They're released from the project. That could be people and equipment, materials, facilities. We don't need them anymore. They leave the project and go on to other things. And then we get new resources for the next phase of the project, that we're kind of initiate the next phase, if you will, the project. We close this phase, and now we initiate and go into the next phase of the project. And then also at the end of a phase, we have a review, a financial and schedule review, a risk review, a lessons learned, what worked well, what didn't. So that happens at the end of the phase. So closing out a phase and closing out a project actually have a lot of similarities. In closing out a phase, I talked about an inspection. That's called scope validation, that they validate the work, they being the customer, validates the work that it is what was anticipated. If I hire you to build a house for me, I'm not going to wait all the way to the end to inspect the work that you've done. There will be periodic inspections of the work that's done in that house construction project. Now you're probably saying, well, Joe, you don't know anything about building houses. How are you going to go and inspect the foundation? What do you know what you're looking at, or the electrical, or what have you? Well, that's where a proxy, the city inspector, or whatever municipality you're in, they're going to have codes that have to be inspected. And they're doing that on behalf of me, the customer. So yeah, I don't know anything about the foundation or the electrical and the wiring and whatnot, but there will be an inspection done before the work can continue, and that's done on my behalf, a proxy for me. So that's scope validation being done by the inspector of that type of work. At the end of the project, or the end of a phase, when the customer inspects it, that they are doing scope validation, that it is acceptable, that it's in conformance, that it has passed these other inspections in construction, by the inspector, by the codes compliance, or whatever domain you're in, there will be some type of inspection to confirm that the work that's been done is of quality, that it meets the requirements, and that it is acceptable to me, the customer, that you have created value and now I am accepting it, that it has a conformance to requirements, that it's fit for use. So at the end of the project, we have scope validation, that it's acceptability by the customer. If there are problems or defects or issues, we call those escaped defects. It means that our quality control was not good. QC should have caught those before the customer or the inspector sees it and then fix the problem. So if there are problems at the end and the customer does not accept what's been created, then there's rework that has to be done. And so we have additional time and additional money, because you got to pay for probably the materials to fix it, and the resources you have to pay for that time for them to come back and do the work. So that gets back to quality assurance, that it's always better to do the work properly the first time than wait to the end and to do it properly the second or third time. So if the scope validation, we want the customer to accept what we've done. If not, there is some rework that has to be accomplished. So the customer, let's say, does accept the work, that they're happy the work we've done, so they accept what we've created. There may be a final payment. There's probably a sign-off, a certificate of acceptance, or in construction, like a certificate of occupancy, shows that we have done everything to code, everything's closed out, there's no open permits, everyone's been paid, and now the customer gets the thing that we've created. So here in closing, we have scope acceptance, and then what do we do in the project? We have to, as I just mentioned, make certain everything is closed out, meaning our vendors are paid, our final reviews are done for our team members, our resources. Any resources we reserve for the project, those are released from the project. So not just people, but also maybe materials or equipment or a facility, like a room that you have just for the project, that those are released back into the organization. Anything that you purchase, like new tools or equipment, those get inventoried and they go into wherever is appropriate, some type of a machine shop or maintenance or what have you. So everything is not, anything that's been reserved for the project has to be released back into the organization, and the project is closed. Now I mentioned the team reviews that you want to have with your team a lessons learned meeting. So what worked well, what didn't work well, how can we improve upon this in the next project if we have a project like this again. You have reviews of your team members. Maybe, this may not be in your organization, but often the PM reviews the different people that worked on the project. Depending on the size of the project, the formality of the PM approach and the organization you operate in, you may have to do a review, like an employee review of the team members' contribution and how well they performed in the project. That may or may not be appropriate where you are. That's part of your organization. Know the rules and expectations for you as a PM. And then there's probably a review of you, the project manager, by the project sponsor. Again, relevant to the size of the project and your organization, but how well you performed as the PM. So those are all things that have to be done in order to close out the project. Now, depending again on the size of the project, you might have an abundance of information and documentation and communication that you don't just throw away. You need a way to archive that, to gather all of that project information, whether it's digitally or you have a physical, blueprints or something. Probably it's all digital now, but a way to store and archive all of that project information for a number of reasons. One, if there's an issue that comes up in the thing that you've created, you might need that information to help resolve the issue or the problem in the thing that you've created in your project. Two, if you have a similar project, that's organizational process assets. That's historical information that I can use that to leverage my next project. I don't want to start from scratch. So often organizations, you do the same types of projects over and over and over. So why start from scratch? Use that as a template to better operate and to better plan and execute for the next project. So what you've learned, you can apply in this new project. So that's organizational process assets. It needs to be archived. You need a way to archive that information. Just don't throw it away. And then the project, you might have a project final report that gives a summation of time, cost, scope, quality, resource management. You might have a reference to communication. This is actually part of communication. The risk outcome. There's in a risk outcome, if you had a risk reserve monies, how's that budget returned? How did the stakeholders, any issues or lessons learned from stakeholders, procurement, you have to rate your vendors, and that allows us to close out the project as a whole. Now, I quickly skipped over the idea of cost. Everybody wants to know about cost. So we may have to do a cost reconciliation. This is what I said it would cost. This is what we actually purchased or what we did with the time and the money. So do those two reconcile? Is there a discrepancy between the two, a variance in that cost baseline? And if there is, why? So we may have to explain why the project is over or under budget or what happened in the project, especially as we talk about like earned value management, the difference between what was planned and what was experienced. That is a cost variance. So we have a variance report. So our budget at completion is what we anticipated the project to cost. That's our original baseline. Our actual cost is reality. So the difference between those two is a variance. So we have a actual budget at completion. Now you truly don't know how long or how much until the project is done. But this is all part of wrapping up that project here in closure. All right, great job. Series of videos here about creating value. That's why we do the project, that we close it out, and we have the customer accepting it. And so there is acceptance and there's evidence of the value of all of this time and money and energy that has been expelled to create this thing, to create this value. I want to thank you for your time and attention in this series about value in a project. If you have other ideas or things that you want me to address in project management, leave a comment below. I love to hear from you about what types of project information or project videos would you like me to create. And then do me a favor and share this series on project value to LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter or X, all of your favorite social media outlets. So I appreciate you and I want you to keep moving forward.